Hello, thank you for being in a new video. This time I have the review of the Tecno Camon 30 Premier 5G Premier. Let's get started. If you're from Mexico, this brand may not sound so famous to you because it is just starting to arrive. But believe me, in other parts of the world, it is one of the main brands and one of the ones that sells more globally. So you have to pay close attention to its proposal. It is a device that brings very good options at the software level. It also brings interesting elements in the hardware, then it will be very interesting to know it. But first, the price in Mexico. This model has reached a price of 14,999 pesos officially. That is about $815 approximately. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. In fact, in Mexico, there are not many devices that compete in this same price range, and most of them are distributed only through online stores like Mercado Libre. And that is the case of this device as well, although in fact at the time of recording this video it is more or less at 12,800 on Mercado Libre, so it is an even more attractive price. Join me to know it point by point. Let's start by taking a look at the front design, where we will find reduced bezels as it should be in a device that tries to somehow reach the high end with some flashes and does it in a good way. Even the bottom bezel is very thin, which is very much appreciated. Also, at the level of resistance here at the front we find Gorilla Glass, although in this case in its version 5. Perhaps it is one of its weakest points because we would already like to see Gorilla Glass Victus in this price range, but at least it does have some level of protection. In fact, also in terms of materials, we will find aluminum in the frame, which also gives it a much more premium touch. On the right side, we are going to find the power button with very good size. Also on the top is one of the speakers, also a microphone and the infrared to work as a universal remote control. On the left side are the volume buttons, and at the bottom is the tray where we can place the SIM card. In this case in Mexico it is distributed with dual SIM support, but it may be that in some other regions the second tray is blocked, so pay close attention to that. Another microphone will also be placed down here, as well as the USB-C port and the speaker with multiple perforations. The back cover also looks very attractive. We found as material synthetic leather. It feels slightly soft to the touch with a very nice texture. In addition to this black edition, it is available in a silver edition and also highlights the incorporation of a small tab with a slight relief on the right side that gives it a distinctive touch. I think you can easily distinguish it if you view it from this back side. The camera module is slightly oriented to the left and has a ring with a very peculiar texture that makes it not only look good but also feel very premium. And interestingly, in the corner there is also a red notification LED, a very curious addition because almost no manufacturer incorporates something similar nowadays. Through the settings, you can adjust how you want this LED to behave, whether you want it to light up when it's charging, when you're being called, or when you're using the voice assistant or the universal remote control. And obviously, this LED is also going to light up while you're recording a video so that those who are appearing in the video know that it's being recorded, although you can disable this. As you can see, it is a device that brings a good proposal. It has a weight of 210 grams and its thickness is 7.9 millimeters in its thinnest part, because it must be said that close to the camera there is a small relief where the thickness increases, which seems to me a good solution to try to keep a thin device despite incorporating high-resolution sensors in the cameras that we will see later. However, where it can get to disappoint a little is in the resistance, since as I told you the glass is not so modern and neither integrates any level of water or dust resistance, which definitely that in this price range we could ask. Let's go now to talk about the screen, which in this case is 6.77 inches in its diagonal. We find 1.5K resolution, so it is slightly higher than Full HD. To be exact, it is 2780 by 1264 pixels, reaching 451 pixels per inch. For your reference, screens in general in smartphones are close to 400 pixels per inch, sometimes a little more and sometimes a little less, but in this case it reaches 450, which means that the text, for example, with thinner fonts will look very sharp. It is a screen that has a very good level of detail, plus we obviously find AMOLED technology, so we will have very intense colors, high contrasts as always, and also good viewing angles. The screen, we can say that it does live up to what one would expect from a device of this price. In addition, it is capable of reaching 120 Hz, but it has a variable frequency, so it can also consume less power when you are displaying static content. It's a display that certainly comes through in a good way in all of these aspects. The maximum peak brightness is 1400 nits. As you'll notice, it's not an exaggeratedly bright screen, but believe me, it looks good under sunlight. There's no problem in that regard. And with respect to minimum brightness, it will also be a relatively comfortable screen. Fortunately, it also has the extra dimming setting in the accessibility options. So, if you're going to use it in the evenings, you can get to turn the brightness down to a considerably low level, in addition to all the tools it brings at the software level, such as dark mode or eye care mode. By the way, it does support HDR content and has two calibration modes. There is the bright color mode, which is going to raise the saturation even more. And there's a mode called Original Color, which has the colors slightly softer. Although if you like very natural colors with low saturation, the display I don't think is going to offer you that adjustment. However, it does offer you a temperature or white balance adjustment for this screen, but it has to be completely manual because it doesn't have some natural tone mode or anything like that. So on screen it does well. In sound, we find two speakers, one on the bottom and one on the top with two outputs, one on the frame and one by the headphone area for calls. The sound in general, I can say that it is good. I do not find it the most spectacular, especially in terms of quality. The fact that it is stereo sound gives you a good amplitude, and that is a good experience according to the price, but the sound can get to slightly overemphasize the middle frequencies, from my taste. It is nothing serious, honestly. We will not find distortions at the highest volume. In fact, it is not a speaker that sounds at a thunderous level, but in sound I think it complies well. Let's listen to a small test, although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. As you could notice, even at the highest volume it does not generate any distortion, but I would like to be able to lower some frequencies a bit, and in this case, despite having a software full of features, specifically talking about the sound section, we will not find many added features. Dolby Atmos is present, but it really seems that it will only work when you have connected headphones with some presets. However, as I said, it does not have an equalizer that allows us to modify the sound in a personalized way, nor does it offer additional functions for the sound. Remember that it does not have a headphone jack, like any good device in the upper middle range upwards, but if you are going to use wireless headphones, it is important to know that it supports the LHDC codec in its version 3 and also LDAC, in addition to the basic codecs that all devices come with. So, at least if it supports high-resolution audio with some compatible headphones, the device incorporates two microphones, it stays with the basics. I think in the price range there are already proposals that have 3 microphones to reduce noise or have directional audio. In this case, it's just the basics. Let's listen to a test.
Estoy probando los micrófonos del Tecno Camon 30 Premier 5G.
I perceive good quality audio when picking up voices in a quiet environment. Next, let's record with this device in a very noisy environment to try to distinguish if there are some problems. As you could notice, I think the microphones pick up sound well even in the noisiest environments. They don't get to distortion due to saturation, nor do they get to distortion with loss of quality, so it records well. The front camera of this device is 50 megapixels with f2.45 aperture and autofocus. A pleasant surprise is to find autofocus in this price range, where it is not such a common thing, plus a high-resolution sensor. So you can access the camera by double pressing the volume down button when it is locked. However, it's a gesture that you can only use when the device is locked, so it could be improved in that sense. In fact, you could also draw a C and it's going to enter the camera as well. When rotating to the front-facing camera, I find it annoying that it enters portrait mode directly, so you should watch this closely because otherwise your photos might come out a bit weird in some scenarios. The automatic mode, oddly enough, is called AI Cam, and by default the photos are 12.5 megapixels as it does pixel merging. But if you want the 50 megapixel photos, you can turn on this button option, although it is recommended to leave pixel blending enabled for better light and color color management. Speaking of color, there is also a button where we can enable some filters for these photographs, although we cannot visualize them simultaneously in real time. There is also another button on the left that is going to allow us to select between the 3 different color calibrations that this device offers. So there's the standard mode, there's also a brightness mode and a Camon mode. As I tell you, in this case, we're not just talking about color filters, we're talking about different color rendition modes. In this case, we tested everything with the standard mode. And notice that it offers 2 different levels of amplitude, and with respect to the agility when taking pictures, I think it has a good response. In this case, if you hold down the shutter, it does not perform any action, but if you slide it to the left, you access a burst of up to 20 pictures, and if you slide it to the right, you start recording a short video, although you must keep your finger in this area, and when you release the video will be cut. Although in this case, note that despite offering some alternative capture methods such as voice detection or touching any area of the screen, there is no easy capture by showing the palm of the hand, which from my point of view is a little more comfortable. Interestingly, within portrait mode, some options disappear and other options appear. So for starters, we have the blur effect that we can enable or turn on depending on our taste. We are also going to find a button that is going to put us a makeup. It can be simply by artificial intelligence, or you can choose one of the presets set with a modification in intensity. So you can change the effect of how your face is looking. And note that it also integrates multiple options for beauty settings. It can be simply by artificial intelligence, or you can go parameter by parameter modifying its intensity. It has skin smoothness, skin color. You can even also stylize the face to make it slimmer, enlarge the eyes, sharpen the chin, stylize the nose, stylize the whole face. You can even highlight some of your facial features, so it definitely has a lot of options to modify your face. And at the top it still integrates yet another button that you see that what it will do is enhance the reflections that may be generated in your scene to give them a little bit more attractive touch to your photos. The front camera has a good quality, the level of detail is correct, it also has a good representation of colors. It is a camera that we could come to consider that meets in general terms. In fact, it offers an excellent level of amplitude, although this causes its aperture to be a little more closed. However, it does not represent an ultra-wide camera or something similar. For example, in a group photograph, you can see how we do not have so much space, but in general, the result is good. In this case, it is an autofocus camera, so for example, if you could focus on some details of your face and also in distant scenes like the group photo I showed you, it could keep a good focus and level of detail, so it's a very good camera in this respect. Notice how even indoors where there is not so much lighting, the result is going to be very good, preserving a good level of detail, handling noise well, and also keeping a good saturation in the colors. Honestly, it is a camera that has left me with a good feeling. In backlit scenes, you notice that the background appears burnt. However, it is able to process the photo well, balancing highlights and shadows. Although it still looks slightly overexposed to the light area, but it was a fairly aggressive backlight, and as you can see, the result I think is positive. At night, if you have a light source nearby, you can see that it will maintain a good level of detail, and we still appreciate a good result with good noise control. In backlit night situations, I think it is not able to give such an advanced result from the automatic mode. However, if you use the night mode, notice how it manages to better balance light and shadow, as well as optimizing the level of detail, so it is highly recommended to use night mode for night selfies. And it even observes how well portrait photographs perform in this type of lighting conditions, which is quite complicated. Although in the daytime we realize that even though it has a good bokeh effect in the background, the result does not look so natural because the objects will be blurred, so the picture doesn't look so natural. Interestingly, there is one area of the picture that was a little better in focus, but it didn't really do as accurate a job as we would have liked. Now let's talk about the rear system composed of 3 cameras. To start with, we have the 14mm ultra-wide camera with 50 megapixels on its sensor, f2.2 aperture and autofocus. Excellent news in terms of specifications. We will test it in a moment. Subsequently, we find the 23mm camera, which is in the upper left corner. This again has a 50 megapixel sensor, but in this case the aperture is much larger, reaching f1.88 for greater light entry. It also has autofocus, and this one has optical stabilization. And finally, the telephoto camera, which is 70mm, that is 3x optical zoom. It also has a 50 megapixel sensor, so as you can see, all 3 cameras have high resolution sensors. In this case, it offers us f2.15 aperture, something positive considering that it is a telephoto camera and it has well. In this case, automatically the photos are 12.5 megapixels, so that merged pixels have a better treatment of light and colors, but if you want a high resolution photo, you can activate this option that will go up to 100 megapixels, so that in reality we will be talking about interpolated pixels in a moment we review their quality. But note that like any device, the preview has a small delay, and in this case note that the device has about a quarter of a second delay when capturing, so it would not be a good tool to try to capture the exact moment. It has a burst of up to 20 pictures, but as you notice it takes almost half a second to start, so you might miss the exact moment you wanted to capture. On the camera, we will again find the color filters that we saw on the front camera, in addition to the 3 color rendition modes that the device integrates. Again, for our test, we only use the standard mode. Now you can tap on screen to adjust exposure and focus, and obviously it also has a pro mode where you can find a larger number of parameters, for example exposure compensation, also shutter speed that can go up to 30 seconds, ISO that can go up to 6400, white balance focus metering type, but the detail here is that it cannot take pictures in RAW. And a curious detail is that if you use the self-timer, note that the LED that is on the back is going to help you indicate the time of capture, so with that blinking you can realize it, and it's going to be much easier for everyone to smile at the camera. And in this case, if you have the ability to scan QR codes directly from the main interface of the application, although the notification comes out a little high and is difficult to reach, but if you have these possibilities only, that the option is disabled by default and you have to activate it. And with respect to the documents, note that it does not detect them from the automatic mode, but you can enter the specific mode called documents to do this scanning. Note that what it will do is to detect the edges of the document to make a crop of the image, but does not offer color optimizer or the ability to add multiple pages to a document, so it is a simple scanner. This device, by incorporating all its cameras with high resolution sensors, of course, allows us to take advantage of these sensors in each of the modes. Then observe how in this ultra wide camera we can make a crop. Although the level of detail looks with an exaggerated sharpness, then it looks a little artificial, does not seem to maintain a very natural quality in this sharpness of the ultra-wide camera of the high-resolution mode. With the main camera, we will see something similar, although in this case it seems that it does give a little more natural detail, unlike the ultra-wide camera. So if you make some cuts in the photograph, it seems to me that you could get to visualize a good level of detail. Still, all depends on where the focus is, but in general, yes, you can take advantage of this mode with the main camera, and the telephoto camera also integrates a high-resolution mode, although like the ultra-wide camera seems to have a little exaggerated sharpness and not so natural. In motion scenarios, we can see that these movements appear well defined both with the ultra-wide camera and with the main camera, but with the telephoto camera it seems to have a little more problems to maintain the focus and definition of this type of photographs. Note that outdoors it is easy to notice how the ultra-wide camera is not as good quality as we would have liked. Although it is a super wide camera, we can see that in the center we have a good definition, but in the edges we will not have the same quality. It will appear much more blur and distortions in these edges, so it is a camera that we could determine that it is simple, although the sensor is good but the lens is not so good, and definitely the light cannot enter with such quality. However, I think it is a noticeable difference in the quality of the camera. Amplitude when you use the ultra-wide camera, so that could be a positive point. On the other hand, the main camera, which is 23mm, has a better quality in terms of the lens. Observe that in the edges will not appear too serious distortions or anything like that. Photography is good in terms of color management, so it is a camera that meets well, and the telephoto camera also maintains the same experience in the color performance of this outdoor photography and also has a generally good quality. It is not so complicated to have telephoto cameras that do not present so many distortions in the edges, unlike the ultra-wide camera, and note that indoors maybe you do not get to distinguish so much this small defect that we saw of the ultra-wide camera, and in fact it has a quite outstanding performance with respect to noise management, maintaining a good level of detail considering that we were in a scene where there is much less light present. Although if you notice a little darker, the photograph notes, for example, the main camera that improves much in terms of light input, although it still fails to maintain the warm tone that we would like. But note the good level of detail that we find in this camera, and again the good noise management simply remains a little grainy in some of the darker areas, but is very well controlled, in addition to maintaining good detail and good color. And with the telephoto camera also appreciate a good result even in these scenes a little low light. Then so far your photographic system is behaving well. In backlit conditions, note that it tries to optimize its preview to have a more or less balanced result. Although in the 3x lens preview this backlight is much more noticeable, and in the result note that the telephoto camera is the one that gave us a more pleasing result in terms of light and shadow balance. Definitely that has achieved an excellent performance in comparison. The main camera seems to have had problems with the white balance. The color has come out quite strange, although speaking specifically of the balance of lights and shadows, I think if you have achieved more or less a good picture. On the other hand, the ultra-wide camera notes that it will reveal even more its low quality in this type of backlight scenes, because you will notice quite a lot of chromatic aberration in the areas of the edges and the edges of the image. Chromatic aberration in the areas of the edges and in the parts where there are lights and shadows found, then I think it is not a very good exponent to backlight. This could improve on the other hand at night. The result I liked a lot, even with the ultra-wide camera that I was not liking so much. Note how perfectly controls the noise, well exposes well the brightest areas of the photograph, and has good detail even in the darkest areas. In fact, from automatic mode we have a very similar result that gives us in night mode, and this is a behavior that we could find in high-end devices. Now we are seeing the main camera, and again maintains the warm tone that was at that time, keeps well exposed the brightest areas and noise very well controlled in the darkest areas, while maintaining very well the level of darkness. So definitely the photograph has pleased me very much. And again note how with the ultra wide camera we can see how it controls the noise very well. I really liked it. And again note how with the night mode there is not so much difference. Finally, with the 70mm camera we have a very similar result, again maintaining a good color, good exposure and good noise management in general. I really like this camera at night, and in this case if there is a difference when you use the night mode, although it takes away the warm tonality that we had liked, but it does increase the level of detail a little more. Now let's take a look at the full zoom range starting from the ultra wide camera. Now we go to the 23mm main camera, then we jump to the 70mm camera and keep zooming in. In this case we are talking about the 10x zoom, where it honestly doesn't hold the quality very well. It seems that the digital zoom is not a strong point of this device, even though it lets us get up to 60x, but it definitely does not show us such an advanced detail. So this could be improved by taking more advantage of the 50 megapixel sensor, because it honestly does not seem to be taking good advantage of it. Here I have another example of this zoom range, where we are also going to notice that the white balance can be altered a little bit. As you get closer in the picture, notice how the last picture looks very cold and the first picture looked a little bit warmer. So I think Tecno can still work on improving a little bit more their imaging engine for macro photography. Interestingly enough, we can see that the white balance can be altered a little bit as you get closer in the picture. So I think Tecno can still work on improving a little bit more the white balance. For macro photography, curiously, we can use any of the three cameras since all three have autofocus. So notice that with the ultra-wide camera, you could have this kind of scenarios. Although it doesn't look very detailed, this would be the result with the main camera, which as you can see has many more limitations because it doesn't allow us to be as close to the small objects. And the result that I personally like the most is with the 70mm camera that has good capabilities to focus on this type of small objects while maintaining a good level of detail. This would be another example of photographs captured with this 70mm lens. Definitely gives us an excellent experience with the bokeh effect and the bokeh effect. An excellent experience with a totally natural bokeh effect. The ultra-wide camera could also give us very detailed pictures, but it is a little more complicated because of the close distance you have to be. But if you find the right spot where you have a little more uniform focus, the result can look very nice. And by the way, if the camera is not enough, you could also use the ultra-wide camera, although in this case it will use the main camera to make this wide capture, and it is not a high-resolution panoramic picture, so it looks a bit blurry. The result, if you want to notice a bit more details, let's say it is a simple panoramic. Finally, let's take a look at the portrait photographs that, as you will notice, are of excellent quality, keeping well focused all the foreground and applying a more intense blur effect to the more distant areas. Portraits with different focal lengths, for example, this would be with 35mm, although it does not maintain full optical quality, but it does give you a different perspective of the photograph. It would also allow us to apply a photo with 50mm, although in this case the level of detail is much lower, but it still maintains a good performance in terms of the detection of the first shot. Finally, it will also allow us to take portrait photography with the 70mm lens where it regains optical quality because it is specifically using that lens, so it is highly recommended to take portraits with this setting because the result is honestly very nice. For video recording, this device notes that if it allows us to reach up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which is quite remarkable, although there are some effects that will not work in this resolution, but it is very good that allows us to record in that quality with any of the three lenses. Notes that also includes a button to enable or disable the stabilization, and there is a very curious button that allows you to improve the video. Sincerely seems to me something very strange that brings an option to improve the video, because from my point of view would be better if that came activated within the system and that the user does not see it. And it's funny because you notice that on the left side we have more buttons when recording video appear. For example, the color effects, although they are only compatible with full HD resolution, but you can change the intensity of each of these filters, also has some effects, as you will notice would show a different situation like water falling on the camera or snow and old movie effect, and some others. Sincerely, I find very complete experience when recording video, although it is not compatible with 4K, and finally it has some frames to make the video look different, for example in an ultra panoramic format or with a vignette around some other styles like video recording masks, rounded corners and other things like old movie. Then brings good options in video recording, also integrates an option to apply a blur effect that we will review in a moment, and also the option to apply makeup that we saw also for the front camera in the photos. Then it is very curious, and finally all the beauty options that we had also seen in the photos are available for the video, something very unusual. Available for video, something very unusual. So in this sense we could say that it has one of its strongest points, offering many options for video recording, and when recording observe that their behavior is very strange, because although it gives you shortcuts to the cameras, actually does not let you switch between these cameras. So here is a major inconsistency that should correct. In fact, to let you record with the three cameras, you must disable the stabilization and record in full HD at 30 frames per second, and note that in that scenario, if it will allow us to switch between the three cameras, you must disable the stabilization and record in full HD at 30 frames per second, and observe that in this scenario it will allow us to switch between the three cameras. Scenario, if it will allow us to switch between these cameras, although the slider, I must say that it is quite uncomfortable. Note that it is in a reverse direction to what we are used to in most cell phones, and the movement can be very fast, but if we offer a button to capture photos while recording, another button to pause and resume, has no button to rotate to the front camera without first stopping the video recording, and if you have a button to turn on the flashlight, even notes that has 3 levels of intensity, then it can become something useful also. And the quality of the video recording seems to me that it is good for the level of detail it reaches, that is 4 almost. However, the white balance with the ultra-wide camera, you will notice that it can be varying a little more at times. The video becomes much warmer, at times it becomes cold. I think in this sense it would lack a little more stability also if you are recording with the ultra-wide camera, even though if you the slider is quite uncomfortable and will not switch to the main camera, so you need to stop recording and start it again if you want to use the main camera. That will have a little more quality in terms of detail, although as in some pictures you can perceive a somewhat exaggerated sharpness at times, but at least it seems to keep a little more stable white balance. And again, if you try to zoom, the slider is extremely uncomfortable and will not switch to camera 3 axis. For that you need to stop the recording and start it again, and with this lens we are also going to have a very similar feeling to what we had seen in the other lenses, a slightly unstable white balance, so it does not seem to be an expert in video recording, although if you record in full HD it is going to allow you to switch dynamically between the cameras, and on the other hand it does not seem to be an expert in video recording dynamically between the cameras, and in this case it reaches a maximum zoom of 15x. However, as I say, it must be in full HD, so that if you have this dynamic switching between cameras, so you record in 4, you cannot switch between cameras, and also the zoom, as I say, is a little strange to manipulate, can give very aggressive jumps. Then there are several aspects in which this device should improve its video recording. So in indoor scenes, the ultra-wide camera manages to regulate the noise well, but does not have a very good level of detail. In fact, gives the feeling of having a video a little cloudy, blurry. The main camera will obviously improve this aspect significantly, having a better level of detail, although the colors seem to me that comes to saturate them too much but maintains a good level of detail, then it is not so bad, but I insist that it is not an expert in this aspect. The telephoto camera can also record with good quality in this type of indoor environments, or at least enough quality maintaining good detail and controlling noise well, and in fact brings a button that supposedly improves the video, and it seems that if you get to give a little more detail in the results, do not know why they have that button to enable or disable. It could leave it on without informing the user. In backlit scenes, observe how the ultra-wide camera may have some small problems in the focus in addition to some overexposed areas in the background, but I think that in general gets to make a good balance of light and shadow, does not have such aggressive jumps in the exposure. If the face is a little closer, perhaps gives more priority to illuminate it properly, but note how with the main camera is going to be much more noticeable. It is not advisable to record with a lot of light behind because the result looks bad with the telephoto camera. The exact same thing will happen if it detects the face. It will give total priority to illuminate it, so there are also aggressive jumps in the exposure. The most advisable thing is to record with the light in front because even the focus could get confused. At night, observe how the ultra-wide camera has a very similar behavior to what we saw indoors. In order to reduce noise, seems to give a feeling of a slightly blurred or cloudy video. In this case, it is much better to record with the main camera, where we will have a little better quality in general, controls noise well, and keeps the color well, but the level of detail is not as high and the brightest areas is not able to expose them correctly, but it is something that we would demand only the most expensive devices on the market, and this, despite being an expensive device, is still not at the top. The device allows you to turn off or turn on the stabilization. So first you are watching a video with the stabilization disabled and the ultra-wide camera, then we turned on the stabilization with this same camera, and I think if it improves, although it is not perceived as an exaggeratedly stable video, I think in that sense could also improve. Observe how some offsetting movements are noticed, and even the focus is destabilized with the main camera. Again, you are seeing first without the stabilization enabled, so you get to perceive the difference, and now enabling stabilization, I think there is a noticeable difference, but I insist that it does not seem to be an exaggeratedly advanced mode of stabilization, and in this clip specifically you can see again a bit of over-sharpening and also oversaturation, and obviously the most complicated thing will be to record with the telephoto camera in motion. Notice that there are quite abrupt compensation movements with the stabilization disabled, while with the stabilization enabled can get to improve quite a lot. In this type of recordings will always be complicated to stabilize some scenes with zoom, and in this case I think it does a good job. By the way, this device also includes a portrait recording mode, although it is not in 4K. See how being static can still give an acceptable result, but if you start to move or, for example, show your hands, you will notice much more. The artificial blur will not change the intensity of the blur depending on the distance. Simply, if you are very far away, the blur is completely disabled and is not able to keep focused on the objects as if we had seen in portrait photography. So it is not so advanced in this even, so it allows us to also apply other styles of blur that I did, like the result with the telephoto lens, but you can see that the result is much more natural, and even when showing the hands, the edge detection looks more accurate, although in this case again it does not change the intensity of the blur. But what happens is that the blur is completely disabled if it stops detecting your face, so in that aspect it could improve, and you will also notice that it does not keep the objects in focus with this telephoto setting. The device also has a fast camera mode that does have stabilization, although its speed setting is a bit confusing, as you can set the recording duration and the interval that goes from 0.5 to 60 seconds, which seems to go pretty fast, more or less from 15x upwards. So for scenes that you want to go fast but not that fast, it is not going to be very useful. But on the other hand, for scenes that you want to go super fast, the result is very good, plus it can record video in 4K, so to record time-lapse of long time if you can give a very spectacular result. Also integrates two slow motion modes, the basic one in 120 frames per second, in this case with full HD resolution, and can also go up to 240 frames per second, which looks a little slower, but again with full HD resolution, and colors again look a little oversaturated, but speaking specifically of the slowness, if it gives a very good result. The front camera gives us a good resolution and therefore a good level of detail. In this case, we recorded the video with stabilization disabled so you can see how would be the result. We also show how in backlight does not have a very good performance, so it comes to burn much the rear area. But if you enable the stabilization, the result can improve, and take into account that also by having autofocus can be a good quality front camera to record videos. Note that you can apply blur effects where the result honestly looks very nice, as a portrait style video looks much better than with the rear camera. Even the colors look nicer when you have enabled this mode, although it is not able to keep focused on the objects in the foreground. And notice how indoors it also manages to control the noise. Well, even in the darkest areas the colors also keeps them well, and at night it will also control the noise well. So if it had stabilization on this front camera, I think it could improve a lot. It will also integrate a fast camera mode that in front, although even on the slowest setting you will notice that it looks very fast, and curiously it also has slow motion here in front that actually seems to have a better definition than what we saw on the rear camera, in this case only with a setting of 120 frames per second, unlike the rear camera, which let us also get to 240 frames per second. And note that it also integrates a dual video recording mode where you can show both the rear camera and the front camera, although it seems to have a fairly low level of detail. But if it allows you to move the picture in picture mode frame with a stop on the right, the corners are completely straight, so we do not see something so refined, but it does allow us to rotate between these cameras. Also, the camera focus is still enabled as autofocus, and it also allows us to zoom, although it does not allow us to dynamically switch between the three rear cameras, but it is enabled to zoom, which is positive. So if you stop the recording and start it again, you could for example use the ultra-wide camera, which also allows you to zoom, although as I say, not switching cameras you would not have as much detail. And if you want, you can also record with both the ultra-wide camera and the ultra-wide camera, which also allows you to zoom, although as I say, as you do not switch cameras you would not have as much detail. And if you want, you can also record with both the ultra-wide camera and the telephoto camera, for example, to show some details and the whole panorama at the same time in your scene. And obviously if you zoom in, you could still notice more details in this kind of scenes, and you can also rotate these cameras. And finally, you can have the split screen mode in half, completely showing the front camera and the rear camera. You can change the position of these cameras with a single button and still keep the possibility to zoom and keep the focus, so the dual mode I think is fine. Let's go straight to talking about software. This device comes with a system called iOS. Don't ask me who they were inspired by, but it's based on Android 14, so it's also the 14th edition. The manufacturer promises you 2 years of software updates and 3 years of security patches, so their policy is a bit short, very similar to what we see in the entry range of other manufacturers, so don't expect to have lots and lots of updates. But if it is a software that comes very full of options, and some of them are interesting. So for starters, it includes a good customization center with some pre-installed themes, other themes that you can explore online. Although they are simple themes, basically changes in the background and a little icons, but do not go to a much deeper level in the system. Also allows you to customize lightly the lock screen, but I insist that it is still not something as advanced as if we have seen in other manufacturers. Something I definitely liked is the generator of wallpapers by artificial intelligence, although in this case you must type the prompt in English, but in this case you must type the prompt in English. In this case, you have to type the prompt in English, but anyway, it works well with several categories: intelligent, photographic, movies, comic, games, surreal, and cyberpunk. Then you just type whatever you want to imagine, and the device with artificial intelligence will do the job for you. In fact, it does not take long and generates you remarkably good results with good quality. And this way you have a unique wallpaper. Also offers always on display to show you additional information on your phone, even if it is locked, and in this case offers you different covers, the basics like watches of different styles. With different colors, you can also select what kind of information you want to show you, but something additional is that in this case also shows you pets, for example, with different animations are little details that can get to complement well the experience and attract other types of users on the main screen. You can also make different gestures, from the most basic as down to slide the notification panel to other more advanced as sliding 2 fingers to the side or 2 fingers down or rotate 2 fingers, and in the settings you can set the action you want to cause. Then you have good controls there. You could also customize your call screen so that when you receive a call, in addition to a custom ringtone, you have a custom video. Although you can't assign a different video to each contact, the device also has a smart notifications feature, although it is mistranslated and says smart reminder, but what it means is that it will learn which notifications you give priority to and which notifications you simply dismiss, so that notifications that do not interest you do not make noise and simply send as silent notifications also. Includes a widget smart suggestions on the home screen where throughout the day can be learning how you use your device, or for example if you go on a trip will suggest some other applications, or if it's going to rain you can also give you other suggestions. In short, it has several options that you can enable or disable so it can make the decision of what things to suggest. You also has an option called Smart Touch that through 2 fingers on the screen would allow you to extract text from some elements. Although it is a function that honestly seems very basic, but you could get to extract the text. In fact, within the gallery there is also a button with a letter T that you can press to extract text from the images, and I think it is much more comfortable. It also integrates a feature called Dynamic Port, which is a kind of dynamic island that honestly is not so implemented in many applications, can work for calls for the voice recorder, or of course also to show you the charging animation. When you plug the charger are different simple animations, but for example does not have access to the music player as if we have seen in some other manufacturers, so it is a basic implementation. Also offers us a sidebar called Smart Panel where you have shortcuts to different applications. These applications will run in a floating window mode. You can open a maximum of 2 applications at the same time, and you can open a maximum of 2 applications at the same time, and you can also use them in the same time of 2 applications at the same time. And although, for example, is compatible with applications such as YouTube or Instagram that on other devices are not compatible with this mode, actually there are some that work a little strange. For example, in YouTube, if you press the button YouTube Shorts, you can no longer go to other sections as it stays inside this section. So there are apps that might have some inconsistencies in this floating window mode. In fact, other apps don't allow you to minimize them in a little bubble, so let's say this could still be improved, but it's a feature that can be useful as these windows you can also resize them. Or it also has another feature called Smart Center, which is a kind of clipboard you could drag there, for example, images or videos, and then in another application you can also drag them from the Smart Center to those applications. For example, in WhatsApp you could just drag and drop the images or videos to send them very easily, and the same happens in other compatible applications like Gmail. So I think it helps you to improve productivity when dragging and dropping, and Drop also integrates its own artificial intelligence assistant, although for now it is not available in Spanish, only available in English and maybe other languages. Personally, I like that they do not depend so much on Google, so I applaud the fact that they are creating their own assistant, but definitely if it will not be available in Spanish, it would be better that they disable it in the regions that speak Spanish. In short, this voice assistant, I think it works well. I asked him about the weather and I asked him to do some things on the cell phone like turn on the flashlight, and I think it works well. I asked him to do some things on the cell phone like turn on the flashlight, and even shows you some nice animations. You can set timers and some other things. In general, is an assistant that works well, and you can call him by holding down the power button, although it does not work as if it were walkie-talkie. I only activate the assistant, but you must quickly release the button because otherwise you will open the shutdown menu. But it is an assistant that in general terms could get to work well. Hopefully soon it will be available in Spanish, and it also has a voice assistant that will be available in Spanish. It also has a translator. This translator is not only simple in a single line, but also allows you to have a conversation mode, and the most important thing is that it also allows you to activate the translator within some chats. For example, WhatsApp is within the compatible applications but does not translate the entire conversation, but only translates what you are writing. Then it is a simple translator, but I like that brands are trying to offer innovative features. On the other hand, also has the gestures that are a little more traditional in other smartphones, like drawing on top of the screen to have quick shortcuts when the device is locked, or lift the device to turn on the screen, and similar gestures. And something very curious is that within the application of Notes blog we will find a very interesting tool that will allow you to transform any simple drawing that you do with your finger in virtually a work of art and in a very elaborate image through artificial intelligence. Is a feature that I liked a lot, since, as you know, I'm not the best drawer, and despite that I think, yes, I do have a very elaborate image through artificial intelligence. I like this feature a lot because, as you know, I am not the best drawer, and despite that I think I can create very attractive things just using my imagination. Gives you again different categories of drawings that you can generate, so I really like this function. An ASM pasation tasnajte me nantarintes aninon. It also brings another application called Carl that would allow you to have a support center directly with Tecno, although in Mexico Tecno is still starting to grow, so it doesn't offer too much support, but I guess in other countries it will be a good way to contact technical support directly in the photo editor of your gallery. It also integrates an eraser through artificial intelligence, although the result doesn't seem to me to be the most accurate, let's say, but it does not seem to me to be the most accurate, but it is a good way to contact technical support in the photo editor. I think the result does not seem the most accurate to say, but it is appreciated that integrates this type of features. Also, as I anticipated, you have universal remote control, so through the Wi-Fi application you can configure this control, can have a large list of devices, not only televisions, although the most popular is the TV. Choose the brand of your TV, follow a small tutorial, and ready from your phone you can control it. And finally, the one-hand mode is very curious because it is hidden only in the quick settings bar, so you do not have an activation gesture that makes it easy to enter this mode. Also does not allow you to resize this miniature screen, although it allows you to reorient it from left to right or vice versa, but the fact that to activate it you have to slide the notification panel that is at the top makes it quite complicated to activate the one-hand mode. The fact that to activate it you have to slide the notifications panel at the top makes it quite complicated to activate the one-handed mode when you only have one hand, and as an additional fact, although it has a vibration motor on the x-axis, is not really so exploited in optical response throughout the system. There are other devices that when you adjust a slider or turn on and off a button or move some elements generate this vibration response in the hand that gives a more premium feeling, in this case not. Let's talk about security. Now integrates the fingerprint reader inside the screen that will work well. It offers you a maximum of 5 records, which is the standard in the current market is an optical reader, but the response seems to me that it is with a good speed, good accuracy, in fact also allows you to change the unlock animation, although there are only 3 options available, but it is fine. Also brings facial unlock, but we will not do much case because it is only in 2 dimensions, so it is not as safe, but for convenience you could use it, although I would recommend more. Use the extended unlock. Google, where you can enable an option to detect when you carry it in your bag or to detect places or trusted devices, and in all those environments remain unlocked. And speaking of Google things, also integrates Google Password Manager that in this case did not work very well in Snapchat, only filled the password and not the user, although fortunately if you request the fingerprint before filling, but the device also integrates too many functions focused on security and privacy. For example, it has the app lock, so you choose which apps are going to request again your fingerprint before opening them. It also has a theft alert function, something that is very useful, especially in Mexico and similar countries. For example, it brings an option to take a picture of the person who has tried to unlock your device twice unsuccessfully, although it is curious because it brings an option for this picture supposedly uploaded to the cloud, but in reality the Tecno cloud has no backup of images in Mexico. Maybe in other countries, yes, but in Mexico this function seems to be a good idea with a bad implementation. Because at the end of the day, and someone stole it, no matter how many pictures you take, they stay in the cell phone, but it seems a good idea that hopefully will be improved in the future, although in this case it could help in case someone tried to unlock your cell phone and simply did not succeed and left your phone in the same place, because when you access your phone and unlock it, you will notice that in the notifications you will see that someone tried to unlock your phone and you can check their picture. It also brings the option of twin application to clone applications, especially messaging, and you can use 2 accounts on the same phone, and brings an option called blank data that will allow you to send a list of empty contacts, list of messages, and list of empty call logs to applications that request it. Then if you do not want applications are aware of this, simply activate which applications will have these empty lists, and is a very useful tool. Very useful is also available the vault, where you can save not only files such as photos, videos and more, but you can also have some applications there. And obviously to access the vault must verify your fingerprint. Brings another option called anti-spy filter that will dim the entire screen except a small rectangle to prevent gossipy people are watching your screen. Then it can become a useful tool also for certain users. Includes another secure keyboard option that will allow you to enter a pin when you use a system keyboard that will not upload anything to the cloud. At least that's what they promise. But here the interesting thing is that you can scramble the numbers. Then if you want to prevent some people see more or less the pattern you do in the movement of your hand, can become useful. Also includes a repair mode that will lock all your files and will offer a virtually blank device to the person who is going to repair it, and when they return it to you, you can disable this mode to have everything available again. It also has a kids mode where you can configure which applications will have available time limits, data usage limits, and you can even activate an eye care mode. If the child has a bad posture, you can tell it to check check that and send an alert. So it's a pretty complete mode, and obviously it's a very useful one. It is a pretty complete mode, and obviously once you are inside this mode, children are only available those applications, and to exit this mode must place the unlock pattern curiously. Here is not enabled the fingerprint reader, so again is a mode that will make it much easier to lend the phone to a small, for example. Also find an integrated antivirus to not rely only on Google Play Protect, in this case in collaboration with TrustLock, to make a scan of your applications, although it does not integrate any private VPN to help you when connecting to public Wi-Fi networks. Finally, if you get to lose your phone, in addition to the implementation of Google to try to find it, as you saw when I mentioned the anti-theft functions, also Tecno has its own tool to try to find your phone, so it is very good in this regard. The battery of this device is 5000 mAh, but you know that we are not simply going to rely on the capacity, but in the tests we do, and honestly it was more or less in the average, slightly below what I expected from a battery of 4500,000 amperes, although this specifically when you are running things that are very demanding with a lot of power. For example, when I ran the energy draining application that consumes many processes reached just over 4 hours, although as I say this is with an exaggeratedly intense use running this application in the background, while in the foreground watching YouTube videos reached almost 8 hours. Then the energy management that makes the background applications is positive. So as a conclusion, I would say that if you're going to get very demanding to play or do very demanding things, the battery will know that does not yield much. But if you are a user a little lighter with tasks such as social networks and similar things, you are going to notice that the battery performs much better. The device also has a traditional power saving mode, which is actually mistranslated there. It says power throttling, but it actually refers to a power saving. It also integrates an ultra power saving mode in which you can have a maximum of 6 apps available. The rest will be restricted so you can have maximum battery life, so it is only for emergencies. It actually also has a high performance mode, which is the opposite and will allow you to have maximum power, but probably also will heat up the device, and also includes an application called Freezer that will allow you, as the name says, practically suspend or hibernate completely some applications that do not want to uninstall but do not want to be consuming resources with a single touch. You can thaw them to reuse them, so I think a positive solution. The charger is 70 watts and it comes included in the box. I think it is compact enough and it is not too heavy, so it gives you a good experience when transporting it, and above all, it has a very fast charge. In my test, in 15 minutes, it recovered 41% of the energy. In 30 minutes, it reached 73%, and the full charge was finished in 49 minutes. So the experience is very good in this sense. And at the software level, it also has some tools to try to take care of the battery. So for example, it has smart charging. So in case you usually leave it charging all night, the device will actually charge much slower when it has learned your routine. It also has an option that you can activate to charge the device at low temperature, so it will charge much slower when it has learned your routine. It also has an option that you can activate to charge the device at low temperature, so it will charge much slower the device at low temperature, so it will give a lot of priority to the device not being hot in case you prefer that way. It also has another option that will make the device emit a tone when it finishes charging, which can also be useful for not damaging the battery by keeping it connected all the time. And in fact, if you leave the device connected for a long time, it will also block charging up to 80%, but this only does it automatically, does not let you as a user decide when you want to enable this lock or not. Yet I think it has good battery care options, and finally does not integrate wireless charging. Much less reversible wireless charging that in this price range perhaps we could start to ask for it. In connectivity is at the height of what one would expect. I integrate support for 5G networks, even brings a quite interesting data saving mode in addition to data saving mode that usually comes in all Android devices. Then I like that also lets you choose which applications can connect to the internet with your mobile data and which applications cannot do. So then has a good management in that sense, but the disadvantage is that it does not have a good data saving mode. But the downside is that it doesn't include support for and without, so if you travel a lot it's going to be a bit more inconvenient because you're going to have to buy the card without physical instead of just scanning a QR code to add a data plan. It also supports Wi-Fi 5, Bluetooth 5.3 and brings NFC, so you can make mobile payments by setting up Google Pay or some other app by bringing your cell phone close to the banking terminals. And a very important surprise is that it also brings FM radio, that is something that is usually only present in super economic devices, and see it in a device that tries to reach some high-end things is very interesting. Although you must have headphones connected to work and obviously must be through the USB port.c, then it is not so comfortable, but it is present. It is also capable of projecting your screen, although only in mirror format. In this sense, we will not have a software as advanced as other devices that allow you to project only an application or similar things and is not capable of projecting your screen via cable. However, if it is compatible with Android Auto, both wireless and wired, and with respect to the sensors, has virtually everything we could ask him, including accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, gyroscope, orientation sensor, does not include pressure sensor, but the rest of things are. But the rest is present. Although the proximity sensor is virtual, then it is not enabled simply when something is close, but when you have the ear close specifically. And since the detection is done through audio, perhaps in very noisy environments, maybe much less accurate, then for me this is a weak point. Let's talk now about the ecosystem, which is very curious because in Mexico, let's say that in Mexico there is no ecosystem Tecno, but in other countries you will find their laptops, their headphones, their bracelets and watches, so it is a brand that does offer a good catalog of devices, but in Mexico there are only their cell phones. Hopefully soon we can see a little more growing this ecosystem in Mexico, but Tecno is a brand that does make an effort to not depend so much on Google in other ways, so obviously it will have Quick Share, Google Fast Pair and other technologies that the rest of the Android devices also integrate with Google, but in this case it also has technologies such as the link that Tecno has developed, so that even if you do not have a Tecno computer, you can install the application and configure it so you can use your Android device. Android devices also integrate the hand of Google, but in this case also has technologies like the link that Tecno has developed, so that even if you do not have a computer, Tecno can install the application and configure it so you can use your phone from the computer and interact in friendly ways here. The detail is that you have to configure everything manually and can be a bit tedious for some users, but if you have this type of technologies developed, also allow you to drag and drop your images from the phone to the computer, and as I say, a very advanced interaction, but all configured manually on the other. Hand also has its own cloud called Tecno Cloud, although in Mexico only allows you to back up Wi-Fi passwords, notes and simple things. Probably in other countries also allows you to back up your photos, which would be much more advanced in that sense if it still depends on Google Photos and other services, but for example also offers its own application of things related to health, which is called My Health, which surely can be synchronized with your devices, and also has its application called Wildlife that allows you to manage your home devices, although very few devices are currently compatible with this application, but at least there is an effort to try to offer something of its own to its users and not just rely on Google Home, for example. In fact, also have their own app store called Palm Store, although obviously also includes Google Play, but I like that, as I say, not only depend on Google, and already then, although the ecosystem is not yet very complete, it seems that it is developing and is on a good way. Well, let's go now to talk about performance. This device integrates the processor MediaTek Dimensity 8200 Ultimate 5GA processor that is definitely at the height of what one would expect a high-end processor practically, although it is not the most powerful of MediaTek, but if we can get to give us a fairly high performance. It also comes with 12 GB of RAM. It also offers virtual RAM and 512 GB of storage. Well, as you noticed immediately, we noticed that the device closed the timer we had, and that means that it has a little aggressive management of some applications running in the background, but on screen you are seeing how long it took on average to open each application. Personally, I felt a smooth experience when I was doing this test, and with 12 GB of RAM should give a very smooth performance also when switching between applications, and it seems that indeed has a very good performance. I think you do not need virtual RAM, although the manufacturer does offer the virtual RAM function. However, as I say, I do not see it necessary because the device actually, if it works quite smoothly, even when browsing within applications with enough multimedia content notes, as the device will also have a fairly loose performance, then I think the device, if you have a good experience. Note that by default brings on the virtual RAM option with 9 GB, but still can be extended to an additional 12, and has 512 GB of internal storage, is possibly one of its strongest points, because at this price is something very unusual to find devices with this tremendous storage capacity. Cannot put a micro SD, but honestly I do not think you need it. Let's see now how it behaves in a video editor exporting a video with a total duration of 1 minute using several videos recorded with this mobile device in 4K, and it took about 35 seconds I think. According to the price is what we would expect a device that can serve to work video in 4K, although it is not the highest on the market. And with respect to games, it includes a game center that you can run offline, although they are fairly simple games, but anyway you can explore them with different categories in this section. And when you run a game, we will also have this sidebar available where you can add applications that you can open in a floating window mode to run them without leaving your game. Also note that it has different power management modes. Giving priority also to performance mode includes a counter frames per second in this section, and we will also find tools, capture Wi-Fi network management and memory cleaning on this page. We can also access tools that will help you improve your gaming experience, like blocking the automatic brightness. There is also an option that allows you to dim the screen while the game is doing some download to not consume as much battery. And if you're playing with the charger connected, you can also give priority to control. The temperature has another option to block notifications, but you can also add some applications that you will be able to send notifications if you consider important. It also brings some options to avoid unwanted touches on the edges of the screen and disable the 3-finger gestures. And finally note that brings an option to map the volume buttons and can function as the button of a game, although the position of the buttons could become a little uncomfortable in this setting, and if you turn the device in any way is still a bit uncomfortable because they are not on the edge, but well, somehow you could take advantage of these physical buttons as virtual buttons. Observe how we can configure them simply. Let's select the option if you want. You can use only one of the two buttons, and now we simply have to position these buttons where we want. For example, in this case I will choose them there, and now observe how pressing the button simply enables the same digital button. Then it can become a useful tool. The speed of response seems to be good. It does not seem to have much latency. In Call of Duty by default gives us the high graphic quality at a very high frame rate, but we can also go up to a very high quality at a maximum rate. However, if we want the ultra rate, the graphic quality drops to the lowest level. Then with the very high quality and the maximum rate, note that if all the effects are available even simultaneously, and obviously if you give priority to the rate, several effects will be disabled. But it seems to be a processor that does have good compatibility, and the time to play, we realize that it is a device that will give us a good performance, has a virtually perfect stability. In this case, the average was 60 frames per second. When we gave priority to the graphic quality, behaved very well, even did not heat up in a major way, just exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. It barely exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, so it also manages very well the temperature issue. In general, is a recommended device to play this content. Then we played giving priority to the refresh rate and also came to give a good quality with 90 frames per second. The stability was also very good. Consider for example that the lowest peak was just 85 frames per second. It was even cooler than in the last test. So overall it maintains a good experience. In fact, also while recording the screen, the game will behave well. We will not notice that the device will lower its performance, and consider that the screen recording is in Full HD+, so if you want to record gameplays for example, this device can give you a good image quality and a good performance. In the game of Legends, we changed the automatic setting for a setting in ultra quality at 60 frames per second, although this setting is used in flagship devices and top of the range, and in this case, as I say, is more or less entering the high end, so it is a quality that is perhaps a little higher than it should be, but overall the device also gives a very good experience. This game usually always has some other low peak, but in general it goes quite well, as additional data starts at 90 frames per second then stabilizes at 60. That is something that in itself the game does, and monitoring it specifically. When it entered 60 frames per second, the truth is that the average is kept very close to 59, again a temperature below 40 degrees Celsius, which is remarkable, maintaining good stability, so in games had a very good performance in games. Performance in SpongeBob by default is in medium resolution and quality, but for the test we raised it to high resolution epic quality 60 frames per second and smoothing activated. And in this case, it seems that if you notice a little more, that is still not a top of the range processor, although for the price, if we would have liked to see a little more fluid performance. Is not that the game is cut or anything like that, but the most demanding, if they are going to notice that, for example, before any explosion may have a small drop in the frames per second. I insist that it is not something completely serious. But the most demanding gamers might notice it here. The remarkable thing is that it still has a very good temperature below 40 degrees Celsius, although in the hand could feel a little warmer, but measuring it with the thermometer, we realize that in general controls its temperature well, so in this case again the experience I would say is good. And lastly, on Henshin Impact we have the default medium quality for the test. We raised it to a high quality level also. Some other settings we raised it to a high level, and we raised it also to 60 frames per second, and interestingly this game behaved better than SpongeBob, which was a supposedly simpler game. The performance was quite good, but what still stands out to me the most is that the temperature is still very stable and very low. Even recording the screen while playing did not even exceed 42 degrees Celsius, then definitely compared to what we have seen in other devices. The experience when playing on this is very good. We also noticed an excellent stability in this game. Very few drops, the lowest it was 55 frames per second, so it is a very good choice for gaming. In conclusion, this device definitely that is a very attractive alternative for its price, integrating good screen, good sound, the cameras. It seems to me that could improve in its processing. It is important that Tecno work on that because it integrates very good hardware, but the result could still improve the battery, and charging in general is good. The software comes loaded with many options that for those who enjoy it will definitely be a good choice, and performance yourself to what you just saw is quite high, so I think it would be recommended unless your top priority is photography and video. Now this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, you know you can indicate it, and see you next time.